Okay, so today let's look at a core concept from my old debate format, which is the conflict of contrivance. And before I even get into that, what happens is you look at the absolutist sort of goal, if you can even call it that, or if you want to personalize or call it a measure, or sort of what the, I won't even say what the point of it is, but it's more of an objective observational basis. Like if you were just to think fully and be self-aware of everything, right, that might be your natural tendency too, because it doesn't make a specific claim like telling you what you should or shouldn't do. It's more just that the specific things you are doing, especially in the unqualified empirical authority state that you're in, like society, and the exact, like what sets your exact lifestyle, besides just technology. You just kind of mindlessly go along with that, and it sets like all your culture around it. But what happens is there would be nothing that justifies empirically, universally, for hundreds of millions of people or billions of people to live in basically a uniform way. There's no basis that could be used to do that. First of all, you would have to assume people's intent. Even if you say, okay, people want to live as long as possible. Now, there's contradictions even in that, because people want to live as long as possible, but they drink, they smoke, so there's contradictions even in stuff like that. But that premise doesn't even work, because you still can't force that on somebody. So like, okay, even if you assume that, it comes with a benevolent kind of quality that like, okay, you're gonna benevolently just assume what people want, or force it on them, like it's for your own good kind of a thing. So again, it would be sort of like you're trying to remove, or what it would result in is likely you would try to remove the need for the process itself, even that created you, etc., in the sense that, like, instead of endlessly reinforcing it. So what the mindless mass majority of people do in any era is they try to cope with that contrivance state, right? It's absolute. It's an absolute state, but it requires constant contrivance, overcompensation, distraction, entertainment, escapism, polyfavoritism, dumbing down your senses of alcohol, drugs, using, constant social contrivance, overcompensation, appeal to ego, bypassing critical thinking, bread and circuses. Like, it requires all these things, but then it's absolute. So like that sort of framing obviously would tell you, oh, it's not absolute, but you have to create kind of this curated thing, to this curated structure around it to take it seriously. So that would apply to any era. And so in that sense, technology is not used to free you of it, right? This is sort of the self-governance principle that would naturally be like everything is conditional. This is the absolutist objective kind of observational basis. Everything is conditional. So, okay, we're animals, we can't control ourselves, we have our base instincts, there'll be chaos, let's say, is the assumption. So we conditionally say, okay, for now, let's have some authority figures. For now, let's have a little bit of restriction because we can't handle it ourselves. But the end goal would be, okay, we want to get to the point where we can handle it ourselves and remove the need for those things. But instead, that goes off the table for people's minds. They instead, we wed our very beings with this contrivance state, and we like it, we desire aspects of it, we socially contrive, we gratify some human egotism in that. Instead of, again, it's conditional, like, okay, we'll tolerate it for now because we evidently can't control ourselves, we're weak, mindless, animals basically. But then at least the goal is, let's get to the point where we no longer need to do that. We no longer need to have that, right? It would be conditional, but instead it's like we just concede to that state. No, we are just weak, mindless, stupid animals. We can never control ourselves. And so we learn to desire that we sort of, let's make our farm, our cage, our prison more comfortable. Let's make it more comfortable. Let's have we'll have better entertainment now. We have better, bread and circuses now. But you never are free of it, right? That would be the absolutist tendency to remove the need, right? That everything you do overcompensates for it or reinforces it. You self-create it. And so one thing that goes along with that is the fact that basically you want to again, you would remove the need and not reinforce it endlessly. So that's kind of like the false. If you try to free people, again, this, you could take a quote almost from the Matrix here, that they say it pretty well, like, whatever, I'll put my own phrasing, I forget exactly what they say, but like, the people in the contrivance stage who were victims of indoctrination of this era of society, etc., would, like, they'll associate their own identity with it and their own interest with it, right? Because the two end up being tied together. So like, oh, if the empire or the current power structure controls like everything, basically nature itself, you have to go through them to do anything, then it seems to be validated. But then, okay, every society that is validated, if they just take monopoly over nature itself before you're even old enough to think for yourself, it's already established. Like, you never had the choice, you never had the chance. So in a weird way, it's like, let's dehumanize, or let's like de-romanticize people for a second to understand the nature of the process, right? People really are just animals, and so they can be trained and tamed just like them, and they're not all powerful. So if you're born into a world where all this authority is already established, and you grow up and you're indoctrinated to obey it and acquiesce to it, that doesn't validate that authority at all. And you might say, well, then how about you make your own or do something about it? But like, when nature itself is monopolized, like every valuable resource and everything in the world, and you're 5 years old and you're being indoctrinated by this corresponding process, yes, you should go out at the age of 5 years old and conquer the whole world and therefore set things right according to your subjective view or some objective standard that you're using. You should do that somehow at the age of 5, even though you're constantly restricted from even doing anything at all. But even if you would separate that and say, it's not hard to control a person, but that doesn't validate anything, right? In World War II Germany, they controlled people a certain way. In China right now, they're controlling people a certain way. So if you de-romanticize it, then you realize the nature of the process. Now let's look at what it would actually take to not be controlled by it. Or again, how easy it is to control people. Instead, you want to believe, oh, you're not being controlled. So there's the surface level coping of it, right? Which again, this is the conflict of contrivance in this manner. Like, you're in this cognitive dissonance inducing state, right? Something that frames itself as absolute and frames itself as absolute even though it's not absolute. So you see the holes in it, you have the cognitive dissonance in it. So the conflict of contrivance comes from pretending something's absolute that isn't absolute, but then sort of dealing with it anyway, right? Like, you're sort of subject to it anyway, or you go along with it anyway. And so what happens is, right, you treat it as like a default absolute, you take it for granted. So the thing with that is, the conflict still manifests in one way or the other, right? So you would have like, either you would directly address, like, the larger process, like, okay, this is unqualified empirical authority, it's not based on anything, it's assuming people's intents and projecting onto them in a benevolent way, like, oh, it's for your own good, but you can't really assume what somebody actually wants or what their standard or priority or measure is, right? It also has inconsistencies, even if you do assume that, like longevity process, people are trying to live as long as possible, but then they drink, they smoke, so there's no credibility, there's no basis for that structure in the first place, because it's upheld by people who, again, don't think, don't value their own lives, aren't consistent with any standards. So, right, those same people are the ones that are outwardly insisting and telling you what to do, or at least effectively upholding a structure that does that. So they're victims of the same structure, but yet they're supposed to be credible enough to uphold it. Like, right, those same people, like, oh, okay, it's the longevity process, people are trying to live as long as possible, but then that same person who's supposedly saying that is drinking and smoking, but yet they're upholding a system that's enforcing upon you certain things that have the premise and the pretense of, oh, longevity process, trying to live as long as possible. The very people upholding it are not doing that themselves. So what credibility do they have to not only assume your intent that you're trying to do that, but then use it as a basis of empirical structure to then restrict your life and tell you what to do? Right, so what you'll realize in objective thought is there's no basis for anything, because not only does it assume your intent, which you really cannot do, right? It's projecting and assuming and forcing that. It's really more so not assuming it, it's even telling you this is what you should want or must want, right? And therefore it's easier to control you based on that. But if you don't apply, then you lack the ability to do it, right? This emperor has no clothes fallacy tie-in. Like, you lack the ability to do it. You're just dumb. You just don't know any better. You have some condition, some label. Not that you don't value that, right? Like, okay, let's say what I value is, again, amalgam theory, and I'm going to go out and sacrifice my life and whatever, be like a minimalist, and you know, I value the human family, let's say hypothetically, right? So that doesn't fit into the box of society. So it would be like, it's not that that's just something different that can exist, right? Nothing else can exist except for the specific contrivance state, right? No freedom, no variable, no self-actualization, no thought, or even anything that does exist exists only to be contrarian, only to be different, because people can't think or self-actualize on their own at all. And then or again, it's false duality, like it's the inability to do it. They lack the ability to do the absolute, so they're doing that instead. Not that they could choose it. And often it'd be the same pretense that people use, like, oh, the pretense is we care about other people, be nice to other people socially in your immediate initial environment. Meanwhile, live a lifestyle that actively hurts other people elsewhere, overextension, excesses, exuberance, right? So it's not exactly the right mindset here. It's just inconsistent, right? You'll value it on the superficial, basic level, but you don't truly value it. Otherwise, that comes with, it's inconvenient, and you'd actually sacrifice and stuff like that. So you can't have that, right? You can't actually have it where, like, it's similar to like what people say with the reparations, like, oh, they want reparations for segregation or slavery, which is, maybe an arguable point. But the problem is, you won't do reparations for Native Americans where everybody here just leaves and gives back their land, right? Like, that wouldn't benefit you. So it's like the one that's seeking benefit versus the one that's unconditional, like just sacrifice, right? So it's the same thing with amalgam theory. No, let's pretend to value people and use them as a prop for non-basis self-interest, overextended means, whatever. Not amalgam theory. So yeah, it's the conflict of, like, you treat your state as absolute, but then treat your state as absolute, and then you put yourself in a position where you have to constantly cope with the fact that it's not absolute. So part of that is distraction. You'll just ignore. You just won't think, and you'll ignore, and you'll have constant social reinforcement, contrivance, stigma. You'll have constant, overcompensation, bypassing distraction, appeal to ego, gratification, right? Overcompensating with distractions, zero-sum means, bread and circuses, etc. So, like, when you do that, right, you're kind of saying, and again, this implies any sort of outward insistence or any empirical basis that's telling other people what to do, right? You could do whatever you want, but that's not enough. It's uniform, it's forced upon you, but then you associate your identity with it, act like it's a choice, act like you desire it. So this is sort of the trick of the conflict of contrivance, is like, let's do all these things to cope with the fact that our state is not absolute. And that's the issue. So if somebody isn't socially nice or overcompensating undue emphasis, it's their fault. It's their fault for not overcompensating for the flawed process that you would have issue with if they don't overcompensate for said flawed process. All right, it's their fault, never the fault of the process itself. Right, the fact that that's necessary. Like, let's say nobody spoke and there is no language and everything just speaks for itself. Right, that would be a more true or honest existence, right? And then if there's a problem with the process, that would speak for itself. If there isn't, there isn't. But what you have to understand is the fact that Instead, you cover it up. So it's like, oh, this is a flawed process, or again, there's no basis for specifying some inherent aspect of reality or nature, so we need social contrivance to do that, right? We'll place undue emphasis on social contrivance to specify something that would otherwise be just an inherent part of reality, like, oh, that just exists, that just is, so why are we socially contriving and undue emphasis and being nice and all this? You need to, because there's this monopoly that was taken by force ages ago, and now we have to reinforce that. There's like all these unqualified empirical authority, monopoly, whatever. Even if you want to say, oh, they earned it somehow through certain aspects, the point is, like, there's no real basis to take nature itself and monopolize it. But because the one cashier at Walmart is better than the one cashier at this other store because they're nice or socially contrived, that justifies or doesn't what you're doing, because really the degree of social overcompensation is what it comes down to, because exit numbers are all wrong. Like, my GPS is telling me one thing, but they've like changed the numbers, or they're completely different. Okay. Everything will be selectively applied, but again, it'd be the premise that, like, okay, this is an absolute, and it must be, because you're not only practicing it yourself, exclusive to everything else you could possibly be doing, but also you're outwardly insisting, imposing it on other people. You're treating it as a false absolute, as a default, etc., right? But the problem with that is the simple fact that if it was absolute, then there's a few things, right? Number one, you wouldn't need to insist upon it or outwardly insist. It would just speak for itself. Like, an absolute would take on the form of just like, oh, you need oxygen to breathe or something. That doesn't, right? You don't need